Welcome to another episode of Who's There? Horror Stories and Reports, where shadows come alive and the whispers in the walls have much to tell. My name is Daniel, I'm 31 years old and I'm from Hermosillo, but about 5 months ago I moved to Monterrey looking for a better job at a consulting firm. The work was tough, but I liked it, especially because I quickly became friends with Brenda and Victor, two co-workers who, like me, never turned down an adventure in the middle of the exhausting office routine. Brenda always said I was too serious, so to unwind and try to socialize more, I immediately agreed when she suggested a hike in the Sierra Madre on a Friday afternoon. It wasn't exactly my favorite plan, but after so many days locked inside with air conditioning, the smell of the outdoors and the promise of a panoramic view convinced me. We left work around 4:30. Sun still high, sky clear of clouds, and got into Victor's car, a short engineer always wearing a faded red cap with some holes in it. He insists are battle scars, and a fan of 90s rock playlists. Brenda started telling stories about other hikes, laughing loudly, her yellow backpack covered in pins that jingled with every step. As we were packing up in the trunk, out of nowhere, an old lady appeared. She wore a wide-brimmed hat, covered in colorful feathers, and her fingernails were painted black even though her hands were clearly worn from the Sierra sun. Without looking us in the eye, she said, "Be careful not to get lost. There's something out in those woods that likes new voices." Brenda and I exchanged that look you give when you want to pretend you don't care, but we all felt a little weird after that. I swear the air felt heavier, but I tried to forget it, thinking it was just an old story meant to spook outsiders. The start of the trail actually felt promising, with the smell of eucalyptus mixed with hot earth and the tree shadows cut out on the ground in funny shapes. Brenda led the way, turning everything into a joke, and Victor documented every stone along the path with his phone. Soon the path started to get tighter, and the yellow trail markers on the stones disappeared for a while, but nobody cared too much. We just followed the zigzag track, listening to branches snapping, birds, and that distant sound of running water. That seemed relaxing at first. For someone who grew up in the desert like me, that river sound tearing through the woods was almost magical. But then, all of a sudden, there was a strong current that nobody expected, because a fast storm must have passed over the mountain and swollen up the creek that crossed our path. We tried to cross by hopping on some stones, but the water swept away a couple of them, along with Victor's sneaker. Yep, he lost his favorite old shoe right off the bat. We laughed it off to calm our nerves, but honestly, it made us uneasy. Since the usual crossing was now impossible, Brenda suggested we go around to the right, carving a path through some wet, dense brush to try and pick up the trail further up. That was when slowly, the fun plan mood started to shift and unease crept in, just like those red ants that stung my ankle. We started walking slower, each of us lost in our own thoughts, and even the trees looked more twisted, their branches tangled high above, forming weird arches over our heads. The smell of wet earth got even stronger, and for some reason I couldn't explain, we all started speaking softly, as if any noise beyond what was allowed might wake something sleeping there. I remember seeing a stone covered in thick black moss, all warped, almost like a face laughing downward. Brenda, who was usually brave, kept glancing back, and when I asked, she just said, "Just as a precaution." But you could see the tension in her shoulders. I tried to start a conversation to lighten the mood, but then Victor's phone beeped loudly and then died for good. No signal, no 4G, just that black screen reflecting our tired faces. I pulled out my own phone and nothing, not even that E that sometimes shows up in emergencies. That was when I realized how attached we are to the idea of always being connected, and how when that fails, it leaves you feeling helpless in a way that's hard to explain. Brenda held onto the compass she had hanging from her backpack, but the needle shook strangely every time she turned east. The wind got drier, whistling through the leaves in a way that almost sounded like a voice. I wanted to laugh at my own paranoia, but it was impossible not to feel a shiver down my spine. The sun went down fast, the way it only does in the mountains, and the light started squeezing through the high branches, as if they were closing up the night just for us. The trail we tried to follow was faded, tall brush on one side, loose stones on the other, And no matter how hard we tried to find the main trail again with the yellow tapes, it was like everything had vanished. Every 30 steps, Brenda stopped and stared intently in some direction, as if she were hearing signs of people. But it was just the muffled sound of branches breaking and something moving in the leaves, far away and close at the same time. Victor, who had been joking, started walking faster, almost tripping, and suddenly said he felt like someone was watching us. He was always making things up, but nobody dared laugh this time. That's when I noticed my heart was racing, sweat running, cold down my back. Even though the night air was starting to feel heavier, a bit colder. I tried to rationalize, thinking, sure, there must be big animals, but the noise was weird. Too fast to be a raccoon, too heavy to be a bird. Everything seemed to vibrate, like the forest had woken up just to test our fear. Nobody talked anymore. We went completely silent, listening to every distant jaguar's meow, every crackling sound multiplying our anxieties. There, in the middle of that falling darkness, I started feeling something I hadn't felt since I was a kid. Pure fear, a thick kind of fear, the kind logic can't calm down. By then, even our steps had changed. We each walked carefully, trying not to make noise, but the tall grass gave everything away, crunching and squeaking under our wet shoes. We still tried to joke that we just needed to get back on the trail, but deep down, no one really believed it. At every turn, the darkness felt thicker, a sticky sort of pitch black that clung to your skin and made it hard even to breathe. In the middle of all that, Brenda stopped abruptly, eyes wide, and told us to listen. In the middle of that heavy silence, a sound started to creep in, a thin, giggling laugh somehow twined up with the wind. It wasn't a child's, it wasn't an adult's. None of us could figure out where it came from or why. Victor, who'd been the most skeptical, froze. He just stood there staring behind us and muttered, "Did you hear that?" But his voice was shaky. I tried to rationalize, saying maybe it was a house or a tent somewhere lost in the woods. But man, that laugh echoed all wrong, sounded like it came from a bunch of places at once, fading and coming back. Brenda, trembling, suggested we find some place to take shelter until daylight. But in that moment, the feeling of being watched hit all of us stronger than ever. Out of nowhere, really thin branches started to fall all around us, almost as if someone was throwing them on purpose, each one making my heart skip a beat. I already felt overwhelmed, sweating, shaking, thinking maybe all those stories about people disappearing weren't just village legends after all. We crouched next to a huge stone covered in bluish-gray lichen, the kind that looks more like a painting than anything natural. Sitting there, I breathed slow, trying not to make a sound, and Brenda hugged her knees so tight her nails dug into her jeans. Victor stared off in the opposite direction from the trail, as if searching with his eyes for any sign of civilization. A pole, a light, anything. The weirdest part was that even standing still, the feeling of movement never went away. The leaves kept trembling, and around the stone I could have sworn there were fresh tracks in a strange shape, like some large animal, 3 or 4 toes, had passed by just minutes before. After a while that I lost track of, could have been minutes, could have been an hour, we heard scuffling steps out in the brush, long, heavy strides, enough to make the ground vibrate a little, like the earth itself was bothered. The sound moved from our right to our left, and sometimes there was this dry snap, like a bone breaking slowly. I got chills. I swear just then I thought about praying, even though I've never been religious. It felt like something was prowling around us, just waiting for a signal to attack, or watching us just for the pleasure of seeing us scared. Time felt warped there. My muscles ached, my throat went dry, and no matter how hard I tried to remember the guide's advice, everything seemed pointless. The sky's light faded away completely, and, in the gloom, the sound seemed to move on their own. The sound of leaves moving mixed with short, muffled whispers coming from deep in the woods, like people talking, hoping not to be heard. For 2 or 3 minutes, nobody breathed right. Then, all of a sudden, Brenda, almost out of desperate impulse, suggested we just get out of there even if we didn't know where to go, before it was impossible to see anything. She pointed out a trail that looked wider, but none of us remembered seeing it before. Even afraid to make things worse, we got up and went. The ground was different there, layered with broad leaves, a strong smell of fresh rot, and the air was so heavy it felt like I was carrying something tied to my chest. We started walking as quickly as we could, trying not to trip over roots sticking up from the dirt. The silence turned sharp, only broken by the sound of our steps, and every now and then a far-off lament, so weird that I tried to pretend it was just the wind. Everything inside me screamed to get out of that tunnel of brush. It wasn't just the fear of getting lost, it was fear of something I still can't put a name to. My thoughts were scrambled, a whirlwind of panic and hope, all mixed together as we kept walking that improbable trail. Brenda's keychain flashlight was our only thread of light, just barely lighting up her palm and little else. At some point, we heard the sound of running water, but this time it was much louder, as if the creek had turned into a real river. My heart sped up, but at least it was a sign of life, so we followed the sound, praying we'd find any trace of the original trail. My sneakers were soaked, my legs aching, but something in my head just screamed, "Keep going." Getting closer to the river, we saw a tiny clearing. There, almost planted in the ground, was an old wooden post, kind of rotten, with a crooked, rusted sign pointing the way to the parking lot. The relief hit immediately, and so strong I almost cried for real. Brenda dropped down and started laughing, a nervous, desperate laugh, while Victor just closed his eyes and whispered thanks in Spanish. The silence of the forest seemed to loosen its grip for a moment. Only then I noticed. My white shirt had mud stains where it shouldn't have, as if someone had grabbed my arm, leaving prints of long fingers, much bigger than mine. I looked at the other two, but I didn't say anything right then. After a few minutes catching our breath in the clearing, we realized the fear still clung to our skin, like cold sweat that never dries. Time in the woods seemed to have lasted. For days, but only a few hours had passed since we'd lost track. We all knew, without a single word, there was something wrong about that part of the Sierra Madre, more than just the danger of getting lost. We walked in silence until we finally spotted the dim lights of the parking lot in the distance, where a few cars still lingered, and the presence of the city felt like a safe harbor. Before getting in the car, Brenda turned to the forest and whispered, something in a serious tone, maybe a thank you, maybe wishing for us never to return there. Victor, pale, still kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected to see someone or something following us. Me, I kept the memory of those finger marks on my shirt as a secret. I didn't tell anyone, not even after I finally got home and slept, only to wake up with the same strange weight on my chest. Since that afternoon, I haven't looked at the mountains the same way. I can't believe I'm building up the courage to post this here, but after what happened to me last month, I still feel this heavy something every time I see similar stories around here. My name is Clara. I'm 32 years old. I've been working for about 4 years as a rideshare driver in the metro area, and always took more night shifts because the money was worth it, and honestly, I thought the real danger was robbery or a bad-intentioned passenger. I live alone in a small apartment, peaceful life, just me, my cat Pudim, and the car that's kind of an extension of my home, radio always on, a water bottle and a blanket in the back seat for breaks. Back then I was tired, going through some tough financial struggles, the kind of phase that makes you accept any ride, no matter where. The night it happened was from Tuesday to Wednesday, already long past the weekend rush, light drizzle running. Down the windows, city almost like a ghost town. I'd done almost 30 rides and was ready to call it quits when a long ride popped up to the industrial zone, those areas where only truck drivers, security guards, and, I don't know, people wanting to disappear from the map go. I kept thinking at least I was going to close out the month with that extra, and went along with that nervous chill I get every time I take a ride to deserted places at night. After the drop-off, coming back, I remember feeling a strange relief at finally making it back to the main road. But that relief didn't last, because as soon as I crossed the old bridge over the river, there she was, standing on the shoulder, a girl completely out of context. You know that kind of presence. That seems more drawn than alive. I froze up instantly. At first glance, I thought she was someone whose car had broken down or who'd missed her ride, but when the headlights hit her, I was already uncomfortable. She was wearing a white dress, almost see-through from the rain, clinging to her body, and her hair was really dark, looked like wet black falling halfway down her back. Her skin was so pale it reflected the light, and she had a strange way of just standing there, holding a crumpled pharmacy bag, like she'd been waiting there for hours, without blinking. I hesitated, my head screaming not to stop, but my fingers were already slowing down, window only half closed. When I got close, she walked quickly to the passenger side. I checked the rear view, nobody nearby, and she said in a calm, hoarse, almost childlike tone, "Ma'am, please, I need to get to San Miguel Clinic. It's nearby. Can you help me?" If it had been a few months earlier, I would have come up with an excuse, but her expression got me in a strange way. A mix of desperation and resignation, impossible to refuse. She got in, kind of curling up, dropped the little bag on her lap, and just stared straight ahead. Didn't make small talk, didn't ask anything about the road or the weather. The car, which always smelled like disinfectant, was suddenly filled with a strong, sweet scent I couldn't identify. I felt uncomfortable but tried to stay polite. I asked twice if she wanted to notify a family member, if she was feeling sick, and got nothing. She only answered, "It's urgent," and asked me to turn up the air conditioning, even though she was shaking. I went slowly, glancing at her in the mirror every minute, feeling my chest tighten. The way to that clinic wasn't complicated. I'd dropped people off there before, just never at that hour, and never with that heavy atmosphere. I passed slowly by the intersection. Yellow light flashing and no cars on the street, just the sound of my tires on the puddles and that sweet scent now making my stomach turn. I noticed that now and then she furrowed her brow and moved her lips as if whispering to her own hands, rubbing her fingers together, a repetitive, almost hypnotic gesture. During those minutes, I kept looking for any detail that could explain my discomfort, whether it was the way she dressed, some bruise or mark, anything. But it seemed like the dashboard light never really reached her face. I swear, it was like the shadow always ran to cover her gaze, whatever the angle. About 2 blocks from the clinic, she asked to get out earlier, in front of an old gas station, one of those really run-down ones, with the sign flickering and the convenience store already closed. When I stopped, she turned to me quickly, like waking up from a trance, and thanked me with a "God bless you" so sincere I felt embarrassed. I tried to ask if she needed to wait for someone or if I could take her to the clinic's door, but she just shook her head slowly, grabbed her little bag and stepped onto the sidewalk. It took me about 10 seconds to catch my breath again, and when I finally checked the mirror, I couldn't see her walking toward the gas station, not in any direction. It seemed like she had just vanished into the fog. I stayed there for a few more minutes in the car, torn between wanting to get out of there fast and taking one last look around to make sure I hadn't imagined it all. You know that feeling that something is wrong, but you just can't explain what it is? That was exactly it. The radio, which before was just static, suddenly made a loud pop and played an old song, one of those my mum used to listen to when I was a child, and that just made things even weirder. I decided to leave quickly, trying to convince myself that the girl was just desperate, ashamed, I don't know. Anything but what my imagination kept suggesting in the back of my mind. Got home with my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. I left my phone charging and stood for a while in the living room. After my heart slowed down a bit, I couldn't resist and searched the clinic's name on Google, and then searched exactly as she said, Ana Paula San Miguel Emergency. But nothing showed up. No emergency notice, no recent report, nothing linking that girl to any hospital arrival. I checked WhatsApp groups from the area and even the City Hall's Facebook, but the night just seemed to get weirder and weirder. The next morning, I almost called the police, but gave up. Who would? Believe me? At most they'd laugh, say it was just a lonely driver's paranoia at night. Things only got heavier when, in the app drivers group, an audio started going around from another colleague, Carlinhos. He reported with a trembling voice that he had picked up a girl very similar, almost at the same spot as me at the edge of the bridge, and she had also asked to go to San Miguel Clinic. But in his case, as soon as she got out, his phone froze, lost all battery out of nowhere, and only came back when he was already far from there. His face on the video call group was terrifying. He looked like someone who'd seen a real ghost, unable to hide it. And as the chat went on, more people started telling stories. A policewoman who patrolled near the gas station, a delivery biker, everyone describing a young woman in a white dress, straight hair, always vanishing near that same gas station. It took me a few weeks to go back to driving that stretch. But people who depend on the car don't get much choice, and one especially rainy night, I ended up taking a ride exactly in that direction. I was tense from the moment I got close to the bridge. The silence in the passenger seat heavier than usual. I took a deep breath, squeezed a tiny rosary my grandmother gave me years ago, and when I passed by the shoulder, I noticed a white blur out of the corner of my eye in the mirror. But this time I didn't stop. I kept going straight, hands steady on the wheel, trying not to look back, not to think too much about the possibility of someone calling out again. When I finally dropped off the passenger and got home, I felt a different sort of relief. Since then, I never again accepted spontaneous rides in that area and never let anyone in without confirmed sign-up through the app. I still can't explain what really happened that night, if it was a spirit asking for help, the echo of some old accident. All I know is that since that event, I've never felt the same comfort driving late at night. My name is Gabriel, I'm 22, and I was born and raised in Monterrey. I'm a communication major at UANL, and to be honest, I never really believed in those ghost stories people in my neighborhood love to tell. I used to be one of those skeptical guys who laughs when someone talks about hauntings, but who still gets a chill in his stomach when passing a deserted old house at night. In 2022, college was eating up all of my time, and I really needed a reason to break the monotony. My best friend, Raphael, everyone calls him Rafa, skinny, a little clumsy, and always with some wild theories about sound, had the brilliant idea that we should record strange sounds from Monterrey for an investigative podcast, kind of journalistic, and partly just to see how far our courage could go. I was never exactly fearless, but I don't usually turn down a challenge either. So on a Tuesday that felt just like any other, we decided to go into one of those abandoned houses in Colonia Independencia to try to catch noises and maybe chase a different story to use in our pilot episode. I remember it perfectly. It was late afternoon and the heat was brutal, the kind that makes you sweat just for existing. When we arrived, the street felt forgotten by the rest of the city. Some kids playing soccer on the corner, an old woman watching everything from her window, and right in the middle, that crumbling house with a gate tied shut by rusty wire. Rafa flashed a nervous grin and, with his recorder and a flashlight that flickered more than illuminated, we went in. I swear that at that moment I felt something change in the air, but I tried to ignore it and keep things light. Inside, time felt suspended, you know? It felt like the whole house was holding its breath, waiting for us to make enough noise to wake up whatever was there. The floor was cracked tile, with old stains and a weird smell, a mix of faded paint and mildew, hard to describe. There were broken pieces of furniture stacked against peeling walls, tattered curtains clinging to windows that didn't close right. Rafa, always enthusiastic, quickly turned on the recorder and started cracking jokes to break the tension. But I could tell his hands were shaky. He has this habit of messing with his hair when he's nervous. I took in everything, trying to memorize every detail, because who knows when we'd have the courage to walk in there again. As we passed from room to room, shining a flashlight across the floor and whispering not to mess up the audio, I started noticing some weird little things. In the old hallway there were crooked frames on the wall, all with faded photographs, faces blurred by time, that seemed to be watching us. At one point, I heard something creak overhead, like something walking around up there. Rafa laughed, saying it was probably rats and that it would make a perfect background for the podcast. I tried to laugh too, but honestly I felt that uneasiness growing, that dumb doubt about whether we were really alone in there. We kept exploring, slower every time, while the recorder picked up everything. Our dumb jokes, the floor creaks, even the muffled sound of cars outside. The air just kept getting heavier. The weirdest part was when we got to the last room, sort of an office that still had a desk against the wall and a bookshelf full of old books, all with spines chewed up by bugs. There was a rocking chair in the corner, the kind you only see at your grandma's, but this one was moving gently all on its own, with a wind you couldn't even feel. Rafa and I exchanged a quick look, the kind that says everything without a word, and tried to act normal. He set the recorder right in the center of the table and said something about capturing the room's resonance, some technical thing I didn't even pay attention to because I couldn't take my eyes off the rocking chair. We stood in silence for a few seconds, both listening to our own breathing. The silence in that house was uncomfortable. It felt like someone was waiting for us to finish so they could speak. We decided to do a sort of mini interview right there, just to make sure we had some content. Rafa started asking me what I felt right then, as if it was some scientific experiment. I'd barely answered when we heard a loud thump out in the hallway, like something had fallen or been thrown, I'm not sure. No bravery at all. Rafa and I nearly stumbled over each other trying to see what it was, but there was nothing there, just a dusty old rug throwing up clouds. We froze for a few seconds, then pretended nothing happened and recorded a few minutes more. The real scare only came later, much later, when we decided to listen back to what got recorded. We got home at night, still tense and laughing nervously, because you try not to believe but the stories get into your head. At home, since we were still together, we went right to the audio to see if anything cool had come out. Rafa plugged the recorder into his laptop, put on his headphones, the classic ones patched together with electrical tape, and I grabbed a big cup of soda to relax. We started out listening to our chatter, the sounds of the street, the kids playing soccer on the corner. Everything was fine until we got to the house part, and specifically to that office room when we left the recorder on the table. Right. There the mood completely changed. You could clearly hear on the recording the rocking chair squeaking, our whispers, and a deep silence right after. But then a few seconds later, there was a whisper, way too low, almost impossible to notice. At first, Rafa paused, rewound, and cranked the volume up. That's when we heard it. A voice right up close to the mic, whispering a name that wasn't either of ours and saying a phrase that chilled my soul. "They know what you did, Hector." We didn't know any Hector, and that name echoed, in the room mixing with static, like someone trying to speak but failing. I didn't know what to think. I looked at Rafa, expecting him to crack a joke, but his face was white, eyes wide open. I'd never seen him like that. The first reaction was denial. It must have been someone outside, or that's interference for sure. But the weird thing was that before and after that part, there was no other outside noise, nothing. That could explain such a clear whisper, like someone had come right up to the recorder just to say that. The silence afterward felt even heavier, almost intentional. I tried to convince myself it was a prank by Rafa, but he was looking at me way too seriously, with a real fear on his face, something I'd never seen. We sat there in total silence. For a few minutes, just listening to the fan spinning and that voice repeating in our heads. We decided to Google the phrase, more as an impulse than expecting to find anything. And to our surprise, we found out there really had been a Hector in the neighborhood, someone involved in a crime that shook everybody back in the 80s, a poorly explained murder, the kind that turns into urban legend. The feeling that the house had somehow remembered or kept, that memory was just too creepy for me. Rafa wanted to post the audio on a forum the locals use, kind of like a Mexican Reddit, to see if anyone remembered the case or recognized the voice. I hesitated, but ended up going along, maybe out of morbid curiosity, wanting to see what came of it. As soon as Rafa posted the clip, chaos broke loose. In less than an hour, there were a bunch of comments, and everyone had their own theory. Some swore it was just interference. Others said it might be a lost old recording, but a few people knew the name right away and started recalling details from the crime, making it all creepier. One of the old guys from the neighborhood, who we only knew by sight, showed up in the comments saying that back then Hector's case got famous because they never really figured out what happened. Just rumors and loads of awkward silence. That just made it all even more surreal, and I started getting this weird goosebumps every time I listened to that audio again, like there was some hidden layer that we never should have uncovered. While the debate grew on the forum, some people started suggesting that it was all a setup, a trick to promote our podcast. I really wish it was. But the reactions from the older residents made me doubt. It truly seemed like their fear was real. A woman said she'd seen shadows inside. That house. Another neighbor said he used to hear muffled screams coming from there late at night. The worst was when people started suspecting that the whispered phrase wasn't new. One user claimed that years ago he'd heard something eerily similar on an old radio, but no one ever figured out where it came from. The feeling was that, without meaning to, we'd stirred something better left sleeping. And honestly, that night I was actually afraid to hear any strange noise at home, hoping it would all stay as just audio lost on the internet. After that day, my mind wouldn't shut off. I replayed that bit 1,000 times, trying to catch any detail, a hint it was a setup, a technical glitch, anything that would get the weight off my chest. There were times when I almost thought, I heard another name, or a cry for help beneath the whisper, but maybe that was just my mind playing tricks. Rafa, always the restless one, started digging deeper, looking up old news at the university library, even messaging a former history professor. He found out that the house where we recorded was searched by the police during the crime, but officially, there's nothing about any recording, no radio, nothing like that. That phrase just appeared between walls and microphones, like a ghostly echo from the past. For a few days, we avoided the subject. The podcast came to a halt, spirits dropping, as if the city itself had swallowed up our urge to go on. But of course, curiosity always calls louder. Some people started asking us to try recording in the house again, to see if we could get anything else. Honestly, even the thought made me cold. It didn't feel fun or like a challenge anymore. It felt dangerous in a different way, like poking at a wound that never healed. I took a while to answer, but Rafa swore he'd never go back. And I decided, at least for now, I wouldn't insist either. To be honest, sometimes fear is good. It keeps you from crossing certain lines, even when everything tempts you to dig deeper. And I knew that house didn't want more visitors. In the end, we decided just to release one episode telling our experience, giving context to Hector's case, the recording, the neighborhood's reactions, and leaving the questions open. The audio went live, but we edited it all to protect our identities. No precise location, no full names. The impact was huge. More questions than answers, but oddly, no technical explanation managed to make sense of that whisper. Gradually, life got back to normal, but every now and then I still feel those chills when I remember that heavy silence in the room and the voice way too close to the microphone, as if someone was finally trying to be heard after all that time. To this day, no one knows if it was just a coincidence, interference, or if we really uncovered a forgotten memory of the city.